Would you welcome this morning Greg Henning, Remembering the Great Depression.
Depression. Great Depression. What is depression? What do we find it to be? One of two things. One is an economic downturn that severely impacts groups of people. The other is a mindset, quite often accompanying that economic downturn. Now I want to explore three different ways that this approach takes place today, from three different perspectives. The first is the stories I heard from my mother, who actually did go through the Depression bill and all its barbaric means and problems. The story she told. My mother was born in 1928. In 1931, her mother died, taking care of a younger brother who also died of the influenza. Now this was at a time my grandfather was trying to hold the family together and trying to find an economic way to handle it. They lived on a farm. Farmers were having problems, as much or more than companies within the cities. Why? All of a sudden, crops were plentiful. There was no value to them. You could not sell them. That was a real problem of our own success. We had more than there was demand. Now, how did my grandfather handle this? He had to divide up the family. And this was not uncommon, very common, in fact, during the Depression. Now, often you would have all the sons come in and hold things together by contributing from their paychecks, going out and working. Well, my mother had one older brother and 4 older sisters. So they did not work. My mother, being the youngest, was sent to live with an aunt in the next county from Wellington, Kansas, up to living in Wichita. And she went through high school and college there, what little college she got. During this time, the one great thing that held them together was their attitude, their family, the love of these sisters for each other. It did not matter what the economic conditions were. They could overcome it as long as they could live and provide for themselves. This is what they did. They rose through it. When I was a young boy, back in the early 50s, all my aunts and uncles, my parents, seemed like they had been adults all their lives. Well, in many ways they had. They had nobody older. Maybe it's just my perspective as a child. They were very much older, much wiser, and much more sure of themselves. The Depression gave them something they had not had in many ways and for a long time, and that was hope, because they got through it. Now, there were others who handled this Depression differently. And for those of you who don't understand, you can steal a great many details off PBS programs. Channel 8 does just one of those. And they gave an American Experience recently about a past president we had who was much misunderstood. Some good, some bad. His name was Herbert Hoover. He was with the first graduating class at Stanford University. He had the college education. He was a great engineer, one of the most successful entrepreneurs of the earliest 20th century. What most people don't realize, that was in World War I. He single-handedly organized people to provide food and keep starvation at a minimum in the country of Belgium. He did this with private sources. He was able to get enough people in the United States and around the world who had great monies to to help use it to support these other people and feed them when they had no way of feeding them because they were caught up in the turmoils of a war. This followed with their own depression. It was a lesson he forgot when he got into the Depression itself as the first president. He tried to take action. He tried to mobilize people the same way. His problem was he did not feel that governments should be involved in this. It should all come from private citizens. But the Depression was a problem bigger than any small group could handle. And it actually needed government intervention. That's one of the things we've learned from that. That's where we get things such as stimulus right now. In the years of the World War I, he provided stimulus in Belgium. He helped them recover by helping them get through it. Little known fact is that he was courted by both the Democrats and the Republicans. One of his greatest admirers growing up was Franklin Roosevelt, who campaigned to get him to run as a presidential candidate for the Democratic Party and who wanted to be his vice presidential running mate. Hoover chose the Republican Party. And after the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt later, after the split over their ideas of how they should handle the Depression, these two men never spoke to each other again. That shows a mindset, very different. The third is how the Depression is handled by a group on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. These are college-educated people. People with money. People working who lost jobs. People who've been in charge of 400 or 500 people. Some of them who'd had great wealth and all of a sudden lost every bit of it, lost their homes, lost everything. The quirk of all this was not in the 1930s. This is what has been occurring recently. And I've watched that program, another program on PBS, where I've seen the shocked looks on people's faces. How can this be happening to us? It's something we have to realize. My mother had family. They had hope. Many of us today have family that have gone all over the place, or we have very little family. We need to reach out to other people to get their help. We also need to reach out to those who need that help. The Depression can come again, and it is that state of mind. But if we had it when there was 25% unemployment, we can get through it with 10% unemployment. What we really need is that hope. And this is what we must remember and never forget: the stories of the Great Depression.